Hello, good morning, and welcome to the Foundations of Reflexology Part 2. If you missed the Foundations of Reflexology Part 1, that was marketing by the lovely Sarah Woodhouse, and that was done back in January, marketing and remarketing your business. If you want to go back and check or watch that, or even re-watch that, it is available in the free resources area of the website, so please feel free to do so. So this is the Foundations of Reflexology Part 2 today, and this is the science and research behind reflexology. May I ask you to remain on mute throughout and to ask any questions in the chat box, and we'll get to those at the end. It's a really busy seminar. There's a lot going on in this seminar, a lot of information. I'm going to be supplying you with two sets of slides. One set of slides is the slides that match today's talk. The second set of slides has more information about some of the research projects that are mentioned, and that just gives you a little bit more background, and a lot more background about fMRI, which we'll talk about in a bit anyway. So it's up to you which set of slides you go and have a look at, or if you just watch the recording. This recording will be made available to all members for free in the free resources area of the website in about a week. Maybe a bit less depending on what happens, but in about a week. So today we're going to be talking what happens underneath a reflexology treatment, and we're going to be thinking about whether there's any evidence there. We're going to talk about assumptions, we're going to talk about theories, and we're going to talk about evidence. So there isn't a great deal of evidence on reflexology. So a lot of these studies that I will be talking about today are tiny, so tiny. We have a very low level of research compared to any other complementary therapy, really, or the greater proportion of the well-known complementary therapies anyway, and way less compared to anything medical. So we have to understand that what we've got is totally inadequate, but nevertheless as much as we've got. So we have to make the most of it. So let's get on with the slides. So, and just to qualify, when I look up, I have to look up at the camera. I'm not on a laptop. So I am going to be looking away. Sometimes I'm going to be looking at the screen. Please excuse this. I'm not ignoring you. I simply just have to due to my technology. Okay, so the Foundations of Reflexology Part 2. That's my name, and I'm the head of reflexology support and research, and that's my email address. So if you want to email me with any questions at the end, please do so. Also, please be aware I'm not in tomorrow, so you won't get an answer very quickly. It won't be until next week, but I will give you an answer. Okay. Oh, and if you write any questions in the chat box, then we can get to those at the end. Okay, so first of all, we're going to start with ancient theory. This is the sort of stuff that you all know. You all will have learnt in your training. The theory is that points on the feet, actually the extremities, so that's hands, face, ears, but points on the extremities have been mapped to different parts of the body. And from there you get the well-known, well-recognised foot map. This foot map is the one that we came up with within the AoR. It will probably be slightly different to the one that you've worked on. It will probably be slightly different to the one that the next reflexologist you come across has worked on. And there's a reason for that, which I'll discuss in a minute. So this foot map, or rather reflexology rather, has been used in China for thousands of years, and it's completely accepted as part of a self-care health process. It's not deemed to be bad or good in China. It's just there, and people do it. It's very cheap, people do it quite regularly, and it helps keep them healthy. However, of course, in the West it's a bit different. So Western reflexology, which is what you will have learnt, some of you may work from a meridian theory point of view. That meridian theory is very much Eastern, comes from an Eastern point of view, but the application of pressure on points on the feet in a foot map is very much more Western reflexology, without the energetic links. And this was started to be defined by Dr. William Fitzgerald, who was an ear, nose and throat surgeon back in the early 1900s. So he came from a very medical background. And he identified that the body is split into 10 zones. This 10 zones, which is where if you have an elbow problem, you might also have a knee problem because they're in the same zone. These 10 zones are very different to meridian theory. Meridian theory may dot around the body in a sort of zigzag fashion, taking in the areas that are interlinked. With his zone work, it's almost like being put through an egg slicer. So William Fitzgerald had somebody working. Oh, I have to show you this. So this picture comes out of William Fitzgerald's book, which is called Zone Theory of Reflexology for Pain at Home. Right, it's an old book, but you can still get it. There's the ISBN number if you wanted to see. You can still access it online. And this picture comes from this book. And underneath at the bottom, it says, showing method of applying hollowed out spring clothespins for the relief of pain to desensitize the teeth for dental operations. Now, you have to remember that this is back in the early 1900s, 1920s. And maybe they didn't have great dental anesthesia at the time. Personally, I think I'd still prefer to go for the lignocaine, but anyway, that's what they used to use, and he was quite well known for all of this, and he had somebody working with him who was Eunice Ingham, and she was either a physiotherapist or a chiropractor, depending which piece of work you read about her. But even back then, the definition of the therapies was it wasn't very clear anyway. So she was somewhere doing physical therapy. And she used experimental methods to define the foot map. So she would get a group of patients all with a thyroid problem, and she'd be feeling about the feet, and she'd find where the thyroid was related to on the feet. That was the experiential method that she used for mapping out the first foot map. And we need to respect that, but we also need to recognize that that's not evidence. Now, what happened was she then, whether it was her or whether it was her nephew, copyrighted the foot map, her foot map, which is why, in part, there are so many different foot maps out there, and why it can be quite confusing that you look at one foot map and something's in a slightly different place to where you might think about putting it. We also need to remember, of course, that the foot map is totally reflective of the body as well. So it may be that it's slightly different in a place, in a slightly different place in somebody else compared to another person. So this is how we get our initial foot map. Eunice Ingham experientially defines it. Her wise words, and you can find this on the internet if you want to. And I think it's something that we do need to remember, because it's certainly how I still work. If you're feeling out of kilter, don't know why or what about, let your feet reveal the answer, find the sore spot, rub it out. Now, personally, I still work on that from that premise. I still work on the idea that if I find something that doesn't feel right to me, even if I don't understand why it doesn't feel right, even if intellectually I can't place that in terms of a reflex point, I still rub it out. And it's still 25 years on from training, it still never ceases to amaze me how effective finding things that feel incorrect and then helping them to feel correct can be on the body. And I think we must never forget this when we're working. We shouldn't get so entangled up, so embroiled in the concept of the foot map that we forget this very simple and effective premise. So what we have generally is a theory of reflexology. A theory is not evidence. It may be based on some level of experiential evidence, but it is not evidence. It is a theory. It is a thought process. And the thought process behind reflexology is by applying pressure to specific points of the feet or extremities and releasing any areas of discomfort, this allows the body to rebalance itself, naturally restoring wellness and well-being. I've got cat hair on my nose. Naturally restoring wellness and well-being, and we must remember those things. It's natural and it's restorative. And well-being is a really big word, a very big buzzword as it stands at the moment. And this is all, you know, kind of so far so fluffy. We have theories of how reflexology works. We also may have assumptions, and I'm going to cover a few in a minute, but we don't have precise evidence. And we don't have even if we have some evidence, we don't have loads of precise evidence, but we do have some indicators, and there's other knowledge in other branches of science that may well help. And there's even more than I'm discussing today. It's a really big area. Somebody's actually just sent me some information that's come from the acupuncture world rather. So there may be lots of other stuff on top of this, but this, I'm giving you some general tenets that underlie what we do. Okay, so a basic physiological assumption. This is an assumption. It's not made on huge amounts of evidence, but I think it's a fairly obvious one, that reflexology causes relaxation and release of tension. Now, both of these things we're allowed to say under the advertising standards rules, so I think this is a good, those two words are great to use. So if we take it down to general thought processes, reflexology helps relax the body. Boom, end of. Really good start point. And this is probably due to both the environment that you're treating in, which we build for ourselves, and also the power of human to human touch. Human to human touch is really important. We're going to get onto that later. But what we choose to have in our clinic room determines the environment, how warm it is, how cozy, what colours it is, the sounds you're playing, the smells you're playing. It's all important. But it is not needed for reflexology to work. It's lovely. It's the cherry on the icing on the cake, for sure. The cake being reflexology, the icing being you, the cherry being the beautifulness of the room. Don't get hung up on it though, because that is not what is required to be a great reflexologist. Reflexology works without any of this. And we know that because when we think of cancer care, a lot of the situations when reflexology is used in cancer care is nowhere near that beautiful, soft, cozy, warm environment. It's on a busy ward. It's in an outpatients department. It's when people are feeling at their worst. And yet reflexology still works. So while it's the cherry on the icing on the cake, it's not the be all and end all. So yes, make it beautiful, but don't get too hung up about it. And I think particularly during the past 2 years with COVID, where we've had to strip out our rooms a little bit and pare down what we had in there, I think, you know, the reflexology didn't suffer. It was just the way we felt about our rooms that maybe suffered. But human to human touch is a basic elemental desire that comes from simply being human. And in fact, being an animal, they had some, they did some very not pleasant monkey experiments way back in the 50s, where they had baby monkeys and they gave them the choice of a metal pretend mummy monkey with a feeding bottle, or a wrapped in bandage metal mummy monkey with no feeding. And the baby would go to the wrapped armature every time. And that says an awful lot about how we need touch, how we need connection. And for us, human to human touch is probably one of the most powerful things we do. So carrying on the basic physiological assumptions, the next one to think about is clearing waste. We often say, oh, reflexology clears toxins. Personally, I don't like the word toxins. I think it's a bit too sounding like poison. It's a bit too emotive. I prefer waste products, because every single cell in our body makes waste products. And if you allow the body to relax, those waste products pass out the cell much easier. So an analogy I use is every single cell is a bit like a power station. In goes nutrients, oxygen, stroke fuel. Out comes energy and waste products. And those waste products have to go somewhere. Otherwise, the cell just gets packed up with waste products. And the way they get out of the cell is they go down a gradient. So it's transferred out of the cell via a gradient of concentration. So it's more concentrated inside the cell and less concentrated outside of the cell. And what is outside of the cell, all around the cell, is what's called the interstitial fluid or tissue fluid. Now, this tissue fluid has to be less concentrated than the inside for that transport out to happen. And so this is where you get people who maybe don't drink very much water, maybe don't move a great deal, and maybe just are generally dehydrated. They might have very poor gradients between the cells on the outside of the cell. And in that case, the cell won't be able to get rid of its waste products so easily. And so when we think about that, we have to think, well, if the cell is already full of waste and there's no concentration gradient, then the energy production is going to go down because you can't get more nutrients in because there's nowhere for it to go because it's full of waste. And I think classic illnesses that potentially show this very well in terms of reflexology, obviously not in terms of the medical world, but in terms of reflexology, is ME, chronic fatigue syndrome, fibromyalgia, and long COVID. And I think potentially all of those things could be related to, in part, this problem. And that's where I think some of our strength in terms of reflexology occurs. Because by relaxing the body, what you do is you let those muscles not be so tight, which allows the tissues to be a bit looser, which allows the veins, venules, capillaries, arterioles, arteries, and prior to all of that, the lymph system to not be so compressed. So you end up with a less squeezed set of tubes, the lymph tubes being extremely non-muscular, arteries are muscular, arterioles are a bit less muscular, capillaries not muscular at all. In fact, capillaries are like tiny little, just one cell thick. Veins not very muscular, venules not very muscular. So if you start squeezing these tubes, they go smaller and they go flatter. So the minute you start relaxing the body, those things start to work better. So if you've got a cell that has a gradient, that the waste can come down, it comes through the gradient into the interstitial fluid. The interstitial fluid then becomes lymph. The lymph then travels all the way up to the thoracic duct on this side of the body into the heart, then goes into the circulation system, all the way around the circulation system, back to the liver, where things get sorted out in the liver. Stuff that's wanted to be kept gets kept, stuff that's wanted to be got rid of gets rid of, and then it goes to the kidney and the waste gets thrown out. Now, when you think about that process, a tight person will not be doing that. A tight, anxious person will not be doing that process as easily as a relaxed person. And the ideal is to get that waste out of the body as soon as possible, because the longer it stays in the body, the less effective the body becomes. So a relaxed body is way more efficient at these completely natural and completely understandable processes. So it can be assumed that reflexology has an effect on that. So the clearing the waste, the other thing we need to remember is the more ill a person has been, the more drugs they've been given, the less they move, because part of that clearing process is the movement. Muscles help stuff go up tubes through the train process. It sort of moves stuff up and out, because obviously gravity down one side is absolutely fine, but moving it back up is a whole other matter. So moving it back up towards the heart, either blood or lymph back up towards the heart, requires muscular input. And so if somebody has been in bed for a long time, if they've not moved their muscles, if they've got any level of disability, physical disability, then they might not be moving very much at all. Then those sorts of people, and the other sort of person is somebody who doesn't drink very much water. Somebody who's very dehydrated might not have a lot of interstitial fluid, and therefore the concentration gradient might not be there. They might have a high level of concentration of waste in their body. And if you've got that, then they are more likely to have a healing reaction or a healing response. So this is why we would always advise lighter and shorter treatments if clients are older, younger, have been very ill, have been on intensive treatment, or if you are in any doubt. So if you don't know whether somebody, the client sat in front of you, might be a bit waste producty, but you can kind of guess it, then go lighter and shorter. You can always build, but you can't take back a healing response if the person doesn't like it, because they won't come for their next treatment. So you have to recognize that there is a thing about not overwhelming somebody on the first treatment or so, to allow them to recognize that reflexology works. So as a summary for all of this, reflexology, possibly through relaxation, possibly through lymphatic activation, or maybe through other mechanisms we don't yet understand and not explained, helps the body to release waste. And so those that have lots of waste, the waste gradually reduces and they start to feel better. And the analogy I often use, it's a bit like a house, and in that house they make 2 black bags of rubbish every day, but they can only get rid of 1. And what happens is the black bags of rubbish build up, and then they've got a house full of black bags of rubbish, but they have reflexology and suddenly they can start putting out 3 a day. And so every time they have reflexology, the black bags reduce. Now, this concept comes from a piece of research that I've managed to miss out of my site, and that is that there's a fibromyalgia study where they looked at 6 people, 2 of which didn't really have much of a reaction at all, or positive reaction to reflexology, but the other 4 found that they got a little bit worse after every treatment for the first 7 or 8 treatments. But at 7 or 8 treatments, they got dramatically better. So that little bit worse was the throwing out of the extra bags. And then at 7 and 8 or 8 treatments, their house was empty. There were no black bags left. So they suddenly got dramatically better. And I really think that this is what we do as reflexologists. I think it has that tiny little bit of evidence that backs it up. But also, I think generally when you start to see people, you know, they do tend to take a bit of time, especially ones that have been very unwell, to move. And that a lot of that will be to do with the fact that they've just got to get rid of some of their waste products before they can start feeling better. So what we physically do, and this is a minimum for reflexology, is we apply pressure to specific points on the plantar hands and feet, that's not right, plantar foot and palmar hand. And many of these points that we work are activated by that caterpillar on off. In fact, that's a very poor caterpillar, and I should probably do it on my hand like that so that you can see. That's the caterpillar walk. If you don't think you do your caterpillar walk in this way, I suggest you go and look at the video that we've got, and it will help you find out how to do it if you are wiggling your thumb around too much. Anyway, so the caterpillar walk is the classic move that everybody thinks of when they think about reflexology. I want you to bear that in mind. But it's not the only technique that we use by any means. We balance our reflex points by using lots of other things. We might hold the surface, just a static hold. We might do a hook and back up, especially with the adrenals or the pituitary, and this is deep static with pressure. We might do an energy light touch, which would be static without pressure, just holding. And definitely, in addition to all of this, we use effleurage. Effleurage, effleurage to the backs of the feet and lower legs, or up with the arms, effleurage. So, how do we think reflexology helps? Now, all of this is projected from our experiences. So we think it relaxes, probably clears waste, rebalances, de-stresses, maybe it will help with pain, may help at an emotional level, feels good, enjoyable, probably enhances body awareness. How many times have you heard, oh, I feel really thirsty now? Or, oh, that pain, I had a pain after I saw you. Well, maybe they had the pain before they saw you. It's just that their little voice in their head had been silenced. But all of a sudden, after reflexology, they start to hear the way their body is talking to them. Obviously, well-being. And well-being is something that the Advertising Standards Authority actually agree that we can say that we improve well-being. It's a huge, big thing and very much a buzzword. And there are others. Obviously, there are others. But these are the ones that are relatively easy to understand. So the next question is what evidence do we have? What research do we have that's specific to reflexology? And what I've done is I've put the references in italics, so you can use them in the future. This is Watley and Kay, and actually, this is the wrong image. I will put it right when I put the slides up. No, this is the wrong reference for this study. I will put it right when I put the slides up. This was that's the wrong reference. So this was a measurement. So this is the RLD technique, and it was a measurement on a smallish group of women who had lymphedema after breast cancer, and they had it in one arm, and so they measured the volume of the arm against the swollen arm against the volume of the non-swollen arm, and they compared what is called limb volume circumferential measurements. And they found that there was a significant reduction in the volume of the affected arm compared to baseline. And this volume reduction appeared to be maintained for more than 6 months. Their well-being significantly increased. There was no significant bad stuff. And therefore, the results were RLD might be a useful intervention for breast cancer, although the results could not be attributed to the reflexology because of the research design limitations. This is a research chat, but basically RLD might well be helpful for lymphatic movement. So going back to that original discussion about clearing the body, that of course ties in perfectly with that idea. The next study, also by Watley and Kay, this is the right reference, and this is using thermal imaging, and they looked at 2 people who had breast cancer related lymphedema, and they looked to see if there was a change using a thermal imaging camera which shows differences in temperature. And what they found was that images shows a difference in temperature within the affected hand and arm over 45 minutes. So there was, again, movement. Their limb volume circumferential measurement also included showing a loss of limb volume, and that continued to decrease over 24 hours. So there was ongoing change after. Now, when we think about healing reactions, healing responses, it's often 24, 48 hours. So we recognize within reflexology that there is that somewhat time lag sometimes, and now it's being shown in this research. And their outcome was thermal imaging may be useful in tracking temperature change during a treatment for breast cancer. So what you're looking at there is that change has that movement of fluid is being seen in one very visually and in both as a measurement in terms of change in the body. That interstitial fluid is being pushed out of the tissues and into the lymph system and then being moved away by, in this particular case, reflexology lymph drainage. Now, we've got to be able to assume, I think, that while that is a very targeted technique, we've got to assume that to some extent it happens in a normal treatment as well. I think that's fair to say, even if it happens in a much less visible way. Almost certainly there's some movement of tissue fluid in standard reflexology. Right, the next 3 studies I want to show you discuss resistance. Now, resistance is something that is used in other lots of different sciences. It's very often used in electricity when you talk about electricity resistance, but it's basically a measure of difficulty of passing something through something else. And a higher resistance is more difficult to pass, a lower resistance is easier to pass through. So these next three studies, this one is in German. We have translated it into English, and it will be available on the website when we get the research part of the website up and running again. It's slow, I'm afraid, due to COVID and all the other things that have been going on, but anyway, it will happen eventually. This was a study where they looked at the arcuate artery of the kidney, and they measured it using a color Doppler. A Doppler is like an ultrasound machine. And this was back in 1999, so it was a really long time ago, and it's never really been repeated or bettered, to be honest with you. And what they found was that there was an immediate reduction in the resistive index and an increase in renal blood flow during reflexology. It was small, and it did not continue after the release of the reflex. So it was only while that reflex was being applied to the kidney that they saw this change. But the reduction in resistance, so how hard it was to pass fluid through, was highly significant. And they said in their conclusion, further evidence for the hypothesis that foot reflexology exerts a transitory positive influence on kidney blood flow. The next study, again in German, and we haven't translated this one into English, but it's about very similar research using, again, color Doppler sonography on the mesenteric artery, and that is the artery that leads to the intestines. So it is very much a link to the blood flow into the intestines, which is really important. That is obviously important when we're looking at all of the things that are involved in the digestive system. Now, these results showed that in both groups, so they had a placebo group, in both groups, the heart rate fell. So this is an element of that whole relaxation full stop. Just lying somebody on a table makes a difference to the heart rate. But in the reflexology intervention group, they also found a statistically significant drop in the resistance index in the treatment room during the treatment phase, and there was no change in the placebo group, which means that there was an increased perfusion, i.e. passage of blood, of the superior mesenteric artery and the areas supplied by this blood vessel, and that is your gut. So their comment was, in this way, it is possible to at least partially explain the many instances of therapists reporting beneficial effects of reflexology with intestinal related problems. And, you know, these are examples: constipation, IBS, Crohn's disease, and ulcerative colitis. Because if you are improving blood flow to an organ, however way it is activated, that is good for that organ, because you get increased nutrition, increased oxygen, increased waste taken away, waste disposal, and all of those things come from better blood flow, more efficient blood flow. So that's very effective. And then this is a more recent one, and this is looking at heart parameters. So they used a machine that I just can't remember the name of, and basically it had stickers all over the body. It had these electronic stickers attached everywhere, and this was showing, it was measuring lots and lots of parameters, and they were doing it in healthy volunteers. And what they found, that there was modest changes across nearly all of the parameters, and none of them were significant. But when they looked at the cardiac index, reflexology appeared to significantly affect that cardiac index, and it was reduced, and it was affected when compared to baseline. So prior to having the treatment, it was different after the treatment. So that's showing that there is an effect of what we do at a vascular level in these specific organs, and also the heart rate fell, indicating relaxation. So this is how reflexology and that whole bigger relaxation picture has an effect on the vascular systems of the body. And I think it's fair, this is just 3 organs, and none of them have ever been repeated, but I think it's fair to assume that if you've got that vascular relaxation, those reductions in those resistance indexes in those 3, then it's probably happening across all of the body as well. So there we go, another assumption. Right, now we're moving on to the functional MRI scans, that is magnetic resonance imaging studies. Functional means it's in real time, so it's not just a snapshot, it is time, you can see change over time. There's more information about this on the other set of slides, so the more complex set of slides. And it explains, those slides explain how it works. But what I can tell you is if whatever you're doing in one of these is nothing like a lovely, cozy, enveloping treatment that we would normally expect for reflexology. So that's the reference. And this was looking at working 3 different points of the body. It was looking at the intestines, the shoulders, and the eye point, and seeing what happened in an MRI scanner. And the work is reliant on this thing called Penfield's homunculus. So this screen here is this strip of brain that runs through the center of the brain. It's the somatosensory cortex. You are going to hear those words again further down the line. And it's about somatic sensation. It's about what you feel in the body. It's not motor cortex. It's not about movement. It's about feeling. And this is the homunculus. So this shows that if you've got a face, it takes up a lot more space than maybe your trunk does, because your trunk is there, which is tiny. And so what they did was they looked at the 3 areas. So they looked at trunk, which was the intestine point, shoulder, which was the shoulder point, and eye, which was the eye point, to see if there was any changes in blood flow within the brain, because that shows as a bright spark, a bright peak in the pictures that they see. So as I said, 3 areas: stimulated, eye, shoulder, and trunk. Two-thirds of these showed a clear left hand to left hand reflex to brain action. So they certainly could see action, they could see change, they could see the blood flow changing in the brain as the reflex point was worked. And in 2 of the 3, they found a really clear left hand side to left hand side activation. So what was worked in the foot showed in the head, in the brain. Now, this is, of course, what we all think in terms of reflexology. We think about things being right-sided and left-sided, but neurobiology crosses. So in neurobiology, what's happening in your left side of your body is coming from the right side of your brain. But that doesn't appear to happen in reflexology. We've never thought that it happened that way. And from this study, it doesn't look like it does happen in that way. So there's a tenuous agreement about the way we feel, that left stays on the left and right stays on the right, from this piece of research. And so they did another study, and this is one of the same scientists, and this time they looked at whether applying a stimulation to the foot is changed in the brain by what the person hears. And that's an interesting question, because are the brain changes being caused by what's being heard, or are the brain changes coming from the feet? So they decided to check it out, and they took 2 different points. Well, no, they told people they were having different points stimulated, but actually they were having the same point stimulated. And in the results, they found that the stimulation matched the activation. The stimulation in the foot matched the activation in the part of the brain that matched it. So, and the point that they were using was the eye point. And whether or not they'd been told it was the eye or the shoulder, into the ear, the eye point lit up in the brain. So the pseudo information that was given to the ear made no difference to what the brain felt. So it wasn't affected by being told the wrong information. It was only listening to what it was being told through the foot. So eye point to eye point. And again, it was found that it was lateral. So it was left to left and right to right. So the stuff that was coming up from the feet was going directly through to the brain, and the ear, what was heard, made no difference whatsoever. And I think that's a really excellent study for us to place some belief in what we do. So we now know that fMRI studies can be used to investigate reflexology. It would be so marvelous if we could get our hands on one and do lots of studies, but these are incredibly expensive machines. And more to the point, in this country, they are doing incredibly important jobs with patients, and there's just no way of accessing them, not without a huge amount of money. So although we'd love to do it, it's not likely to happen. Brain blood flow matches the reflexology points. So the changes in the brain, the hemodynamic response, matched the area of the brain that we think of as the reflexology point. Reflexology points may result in a one-sided as opposed to a cross-sided effect, and it doesn't matter what the brain hears, it reacts to the reflexology stimulus. So reflex is linked to specific parts of the brain. We understand that as the relevant reflex, and when the reflex is stimulated, there's a hemodynamic change. So there's an assumption in there that brain-related stimuli are received from all the reflexes we treat. Now, we don't know that for sure. We don't have the evidence to show that. We've only got 2 tiny little studies to show that they are definitely linked in terms of hemodynamic response. But, you know, we can make an assumption that it's probably the case. So how does reflexology work? Well, we don't completely know, but there is definitely some connection between the foot reflex and the brain. Is that neural? Is that fascial? Is that chemical? We don't know. But foot and brain, yes. There's some connection between the foot and the organ. Is that neural? Is that fascial? Is that chemical? We don't know, but there is a connection. But we don't have the whole process. So we don't have the bit that goes brain to organ. That's something that probably needs to be looked at some point when we can get our hands on an fMRI scanner. So what we do know is that there's those 2 passages, but we don't know how this connects with this. But, you know, you can guess it's probably going to be neural, fascial, or chemical. More likely neural or fascial. So maybe we need to look in other branches of science. And so perhaps we need to think of what's going on under the skin. So this is a picture of the tactile receptors in the skin. There are lots of different, I can't say that word, it's corpuscle, I think, corpuscle. But anyway, there's lots of different receptors under the skin. And we need to be aware of these because we do, after all, treat the skin. And in fact, we treat mainly a very specific sort of skin. We treat glabrous skin. And this is non-hairy skin. So glabrous skin is palms of hands, soles of feet, and the genitals. And there are 4 types of mechanoreceptors, and these are receptors in the skin and on other organs that detect sensations of touch as well. And they're designed to detect mechanical sensations or differences in pressure. So they react to how things feel, basically. And the map from this piece of research from Straszolkowski et al. Shows what it looks like. There are 4 different types. Some are bigger, some are smaller. And when you start to go through them, and I'm not going to go into massive depth here, but you can see 40% of the human hand is this Meissner's one, and it requires light touch. And it involved in the adaptation to changes in texture. So this is where you can tell whether it's a smooth or whether it's a slightly grainy surface or whether it's velvet or whatever. They're going to be the ones involved in that. The Pacinian corpus corpuscle is 10 to 15% of the human hand, but these are big areas, and they're in perception of frequency of vibration. Now, don't forget, when we touch, we are using energetic touch, so we are probably using vibration, and these work to on-off pressure. The Merkel corpuscle, I can't say that word. Anyway, 25% of the human hand. These are tiny little points. They like static stimulation, so they like just to be held and pressed. And these can detect shape and texture, so differences between I don't know, grit and sand. They'll be able to tell the difference, and they have sustained responses coming out of that. And then the last one is Ruffini corpuscles, and these are 20% of the human hands, and these require a skin stretch. So sometimes when you might feel like, oh, this isn't working, or this isn't working, maybe try a stretch. Maybe it's this type of receptor that's involved, and this detects tension in the skin and fascia. So there's that fascial link in there. So those are the four. So these, by stimulating these, we cause impulses of increased frequency to go to the central nervous system, and it goes to that green bit of brain that I showed you earlier, that's somatosensory cortex, and also other cortical areas. And these mechanoreceptors are involved in the differentiation of discriminative touch quality. And that in part is to keep us safe. It tells us about the surfaces, it tells us about what's going on around us, it tells us don't put your fingers in there, you're going to get burnt. It tells us all those sorts of things, and it keeps the individual safe. So it's really important, and this is part of proprioception. And proprioception is the ability to receive information about oneself. So it's essential for motor coordination of the body. If you don't have it, and there's a really interesting case study in the book by Oliver Sacks called The Man Who Mistook His Wife for a Hat. And it's a really interesting case study of a woman who loses her proprioception, and she has to learn how to use her body again. And she's literally just like a sack. She can't do anything until she learns how to do it. And then she learns how to do it using her eyes. Proprioception is something that astronauts lose when they go to space, because they stop having the input from their feet and their hands. So they lose the element of body coordination that comes from proprioception. So proprioceptors form reflex circuits with motor neurons in the brain to provide rapid feedback about body and limb position. So we know where we are. We might not be able to see our hands, but we know where they are because our body is telling us. And it provides a perceptual representation of the body and its ongoing interaction with the environment. So it knows when it's getting a bit hot, it knows when it's getting a bit cold, it knows if it's going near a fire, it knows that the body just knows where it is. And it's really, really important. And again, just to remind you, these are the mechanoreceptors, this is the foot map, not too terribly different. So then we go on to non-glabrous skin. That's glabrous skin, that's non-hairy. Now we go on to hairy skin. And you might think, oh, I don't treat hairy skin. Well, you do, because palms, backs of the hands, up the arms, up the legs, it's all hairy. It might not look hairy, and obviously the fashion for women is to have the hair taken out, but it is hairy skin. And it's everywhere apart from the genitals and the two places that we work. And this has a new brand of science. It's only about 6 or 7 years that this brand of science came out, and that's called affective touch. And there are specific nerves in this skin called C-tactile afferents, or CT afferents. These respond to slow skin to skin rhythmic stroking, skin to skin temperature rather, rhythmic stroking, what we have all learnt to do when we effleurage. And they are unmyelinated nerves, which means they work really fast. They're involved in the processing of body signals, and what they work via is called the interoceptive pathways that have a role and wait for it, in the control of organ functions. So all of a sudden you can start to see that potential link from the brain to the organs through these interoceptive pathways. What was I going to say? So when we are treating somebody who's been unwell, it may well be that it's better, or overwhelmed, or really unhappy, or anything extreme. It might be better to keep up with a lot more of those effleurage movements to help with this interoceptive pathway. So what's interoception? So we've had proprioception, which is the knowing where you are in space. Interoception is the sense of the internal state of the body. What's going on in my body? The brain's process of integrating signals relayed into specific subregions. And again, here we've got somatosensory, that green area on that brain again, that brain picture. And these allow for a subtle representation of the physiological state of the body. So this is reflecting, if you like, the physiological state of all the body into the brain. The brain then understands it. And this is really important in maintaining homeostasis. What do we say? We rebalance. What is rebalance? It's homeostasis. Interoception maintains homeostasis in the body, and aiding in self-awareness, reminding them that they might have a bit of pain there, or reminding them that they're thirsty. So effective touch also provides comforting interpersonal touch, conveying social support. So when you've got somebody who's been very unwell, when you've got somebody who perhaps has been having cancer care, that effleurage element of what you're doing can become even more important, because it helps them bring them back into that level of socialness. This effective touch activates the posterior insular cortex and the midfrontal orbitocortex in the brain. So it's having a different effect on the brain somewhere else, and it aids body ownership. And body ownership is also called psychological self, the psychological self. It modulates pain and mediates hedonistic touch. All of this comes from those gentle skin to skin temperature effleurage movements. So when we're looking at the hedonic system, what is this? So as I said here, it's hedonistic touch. What is the hedonic system? The hedonic system is a nervous system circuit for all pleasure, and that's sensory pleasure, which is touch, but also the higher types of pleasure: cognitive, social, aesthetic, and moral. So when you go to a beautiful garden or a beautiful art gallery, or you feel some beautiful fabric, you know, there's a whole load of things in there. It's not, or you read a really good book, it's about the bigger picture of pleasure. And the hedonic system controls the capacity for normal pleasure, which is essential for healthy psychology and well-being. Hedonic system, healthy psychology, well-being. Pretty key, I think, for what we do. So now we move on to pain. So back in 1965, these researchers, Melzack and Wall, were trying to put a theory together about how pain works. And they came up with something called the gate control theory. This is that non-painful input closes the nerve gates to painful input. Actually, I think what they say is that non-painful input goes up fast nerves, where pain goes up slow nerves, and it gets in the way. It's a bit like a train track. And the gates get closed. So the painful input is trapped out of the nerves. So the pain system can't then travel up to the central nervous system. So by stimulating with a non-noxious input, which sounds awful, but that's basically touch, you're able to suppress pain. Now, we all know this. We all know this because if we bang our elbows, what do? We rub it. It's the bigger picture of that, really, is that, oh, small child falls over, what do? You rub their knees. It's that get the touch in there as soon as possible, get it blocking the pain. Pain goes away, child stops crying. Me personally, if I bang my elbow, I stop swearing probably. But anyway, so it's about applying something applying touch to take away the ability to feel pain. And that's a really important part, I think, of what we do. So coming back to our original question is, what is reflexology? Well, reflexology, it's not really a specific action, but an act of the whole. It's not specifically direct action. It's not specifically discriminative, nor indeed effective touch. It's not specifically interoception, pain gate theory. It's got probably elements of fascia that I've not even really mentioned. It's probably got elements of muscle feedback, which I've not really mentioned. Almost definitely got elements of intention in there. But that's quantum physics, and I'm really not an expert on that. But I think when we set our intentions, we are changing our energies, which may change our wavelengths, which then might have an effect on those receptors that feel vibration. Who knows? But we are not, it's not a single one, two, or three of those. It's the sum of the whole. And that's why it's holistic, and that's why it's so marvelous, and that's why it's also so difficult to do research on, because it's taking something that's very human, which is touch, and transferring it into something that is great for the human kind, for making humankind better. And so, you know, we should all be feeling very happy about what we do. So how does it help again? Well, it rebalances, which is homeostasis, which comes from interoception. It de-stresses. Well, that probably comes from interoception and hedonistic touch. It may help with pain, and that would be the pain gate theory. So that's that nice touch versus pain touch. It may help at an emotional level. Hedonistic touch, that whole psychological self thing, is really important. It feels good. That's hedonistic touch. It's enjoyable. It's hedonistic touch. It enhances body awareness, that, oh, I feel thirsty after a treatment, but I'm recognizing I feel thirsty after a treatment. I might have felt thirsty before, but I didn't recognize it. That's that interoception and proprioception again. And then there's the whole well-being thing, which, as I said, the Advertising Standards Authority actually allows us to say that we improve well-being. And that's that hedonistic touch. And there, you know, there's going to be a whole lot more other stuff that comes out as well. But this is where an hour's gone and I need to sort of bring it all to the close. And also, don't forget the non-specific mechanisms, the therapeutic touch. That's really important. Therapeutic relationships, really important. The fact that that client came to you there's something about you that's attracted them, even though they've never met you. There's an energetic level of attraction. You're an empathic therapist. There's an awful lot to be said about having somebody there that's on their side. You do active listening. You don't switch your ears off when they start talking. And we are very supportive as a group of people. So you've got a package of non-specific mechanisms there. And then there's placebo. Now, placebo is always deemed to be a little bit of a negative thing, but actually, if I thought I could heal somebody, they wouldn't heal, in inverted commas, and they wouldn't have any side effects or anything, and it was because they were getting better by themselves. I don't mind that in the slightest, because as long as they get better, it's good enough for me. So placebo is about, because somebody has done something nice to me, I am going to feel better. Now, the flip side of that is nocebo. And the nocebo effect is where you've told somebody that something nasty is going to happen to them, and then they feel that nastiness. And that comes into play when you are looking at telling people about healing reactions or healing responses. I would always play them down. I'd let people know without a doubt, because I think people need to know what they may have coming to them, especially if they've had been unwell, been sick, had a lot of drugs, etc., have a lot of build up of waste products. Then they need to know that they might feel a bit rubbish the next day. but don't overdo it, because then you'll start putting in the nocebo effect, and they will start to feel ill because you've told them to feel ill. So there's something in there. But all of these non-specific mechanisms just help support the more total effect that we have as reflexologists. So these are the references for the pieces of work I've just shown you. As I say, the slides will be available, and you will be able to choose whether you look at the simple slides, which are in the talk as well, or you look at the more complex version of the slides. But there were just too many for me to fit into an hour. Thank you for listening, and we've got 7 minutes for questions. So if any of you have any questions, I'm going to just have a look in the chat box. Beware of any kidney problems. Yes. So the reason I say beware of any kidney problems is because you need to understand that if you are having an effect on that clearing problem, that clearing element, and if there are liver or kidney problems, then maybe you don't want to go in too deep. That maybe you want to hold back, certainly on those reflexes. I would say not that you miss the reflexes out, because don't forget, we're trying to balance the whole person, but that maybe you hold back a little bit on those reflexes if there are liver and kidney problems in that individual client, such that you don't overwhelm those reflexes. But also be aware that with healing, with rather waste release, you can come healing reactions, healing transitions. And if you've got someone who's been very unwell, you may want to let them know that there is the potential for a healing reaction. But just don't go too heavy on it, because where there is placebo, there's also nocebo, and nocebo is the opposite to placebo. So placebo is all about, you've given me something nice, I'm going to assume it, I'm going to say it's nice and it's lovely, and my brain is going to believe that. Nocebo is, you are telling me something nasty is going to happen, and my brain is going to believe that as well. So when you talk about healing reactions and healing responses and healing transitions, please not healing crisis, because that's a really big, scary word. It's a good idea to be aware of letting people know about it without going too heavy on it. Okay, Vicky, you have a question. Would you like to ask your question? Yeah.
Hi. Yeah, hi. Thank you so much, Tracy. I was thinking about the people that did these research papers, especially in maybe Germany, but anywhere. Mm-hmm. So what do you think motivated them to, research reflexology in that way?
Do you know, reflexology is very much better respected in Germany, and has been for some time. They have 2 different levels of reflexology in Germany. They have the stress relieving therapists, and then they have the ones that work under Heilpraktikers, and they're allowed to claim an awful lot more than we are in this country. And I think that it was that situation of the therapist that probably prompted the research. But it's really hard to get any information from those scientists, because many of them have now retired. I have tried to speak to them in the past. In fact, no, I saw one of them that did the mesenteric artery at a conference recently, and I emailed him and I got no response. So, it's the scientists are really very difficult to get hold of and to talk to. So I don't know the answer to that. I think it's an interesting question, but I really think it's related to where reflexologists are seen in the hierarchy in Germany as opposed to anywhere else. Good question. Right. I have somebody who's mentioned the diabetic monitors. I think that's a really interesting question about the change in blood sugar during a treatment. And I do think that that's something that potentially we can look at moving forwards. My husband's a diabetic, and he's got an indwelling monitor now, and I think it would be really interesting to look at. We did looking at the wearables, the ones that you have around your wrist or your watches. The problem with those is they have very different technology and very unstandardized technology across all of them. So it's really hard to do any form of study with those. Right, I'm going down to my questions. Yes, can we access the translation of the German research papers? We only translated one of them. and it's not yet on the website, but as I get around to actually building, I've got to put everything in the website in its right way. Could you go on mute, please, because you're rustly. But when the website goes live with the research available, I will be putting it up there. So you will be able to, if you want to drop me an email at tsmith@aor.org.uk, I will send it to you. So there we go, the German translation, English translation. Right, so Vicky started to write something.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hi, Tracy.
Hi, hello. Hi.
It was only really to carry on with what somebody else had said, that my client wore a kind of a Fitbit type thing, and I'm not sure what it was. She was in a lot of pain.
Yeah.
But her heart slowed during a treatment more than when she sleeps. She couldn't believe it. She had to come back the following week and show me, and show me the details, how much it had actually changed.
Yeah.
That was
and I really think that's something that we need to look at, but the problem is that all these platforms are so really different. And there is a study where they looked at the effect of chaos in the brain that was reduced by 3 things: rock music, classical music, and reflexology. And reflexology was better in every single measure. They did 4 different measures of chaos, and reflexology was way more effective in all of those levels of chaos. However, of the other 2, rock music was better than classical music. And that was really surprising until you realize that actually it was a 19 to 23-year-old age group of volunteers. So, I think there's stuff I could have included, but it would have been way more than an hour. But yeah, I think there's definitely something about the wearables that we need to look at, but we need to look at the standardization of it first. Right, next question. Looking at glabrous skin and the mechanoreceptors, light pressure, nothing there about hard pressure. Interesting, given different thoughts on types of pressure to be used. I absolutely agree with that without question. It does, however, mention that on-off pressure, which works with the Pacinian corpuscles. I can't say that word. But the hard pressure, I think it works with different people as well. Light works with most people. I think some people love hard pressure, and that must be working in their brain somehow. So yeah, again, it's another question. We don't have all the answers to all the evidence in any way, shape or form. Right. If more could undertake a degree course like Samuel, we would have more resources. That's very true. Carol Samuel actually did a PhD. So we now have, I think, 5 PhDs in reflexology. Yes, of course, that really helps. But then they have to stay within the scientific world to keep doing the research issue. And not all of them do. There was a wonderful woman who probably 15 years ago did some work on constipation in children called Jenny Gordon, and she was a nurse, and she did her PhD, and she did some marvelous work on these poor children who were constipated right up to here, but she never published. So she did the research, but she never published the papers, and that was because she moved on to another job, and the next job got more complicated. And so we do have to be very aware of those sorts of scenarios, that people are doing the perhaps doing the work and then moving on. The Daniel Keown book on the fascia is called The Spark in the Machine by Daniel Keown. There. I've only read a little bit of it, but it's already really, really interesting. And I think fascia is probably way more important than we actually think about it for health, for well-being, for the lot. But I don't know how much it's whether it's referable to reflexology. I need to read the book a bit more. I'd hope to do it by today, but I haven't. So what is the communication method from reflex to organ? I think it just has to be nervous. As it stands at the moment, I don't think we can say anything different. But I do think it's a mixture of everything. It's touch going through the nerves, it's how the brain reacts, it's the individual, the client that's responding to that. Because don't forget, if we provide the stimuli, the client responds. And we must always remember that. We aren't making the client respond, we are providing the stimulus, providing the facilitating the change. They are making the change. And that, I think that's quite important. So I suspect it's nervous, but nervous probably with other things going on as well. Hot stones, interesting question. The skin to skin temperature is about this effleurage business. Skin to skin is so skin usually, well, we are usually 36.6 there or thereabouts in temperature. Certainly when your hot stones are going to reduce in temperature, they are going to go through that temperature range. Does it make a difference? I don't know. I just don't know the answer to that. I think it's a very interesting question. Does it provide extra effect because it's over a temperature range? I don't know. Does it provide less of an effect because it's over a temperature range? I don't know. All I know is that effective touch has been defined to be very specifically at this speed that we do effleurage at, and that has been put into place for effleurage many years prior to effective touch being defined, and that we do it skin to skin at that temperature many years before it was defined. I don't know if it makes a difference with hot stones. I can't answer that. Sorry. Right, let's move down. Oh, good. I think that's it. I don't think there are any more questions. So I am going to get rid of that. I'm going to stop sharing. I'm going to be very embarrassed and say I now have to go away and record it again. Ready for you all to be able to watch it again, which is just terrible. But that's what comes of being speaker and host at the same time, as opposed to having somebody else hosting the meeting. I'm glad you've all enjoyed it. I know it was really complicated. I know there was a lot of information in there, but as I say, once I've re-recorded it, you'll be able to watch the recording and you'll be able to look at the slides, and hopefully that will help. If you have questions that come up, you can either put them today in the Facebook group under that post that I've already put up, or you can wait until the recording goes out and then you can put it up then under Facebook. And my cat's come in and open the door again, sorry. You can always email me. So I'm tsmith@aor.org.uk. I'm not here tomorrow, so if you do email me and I don't get back to you today, that's because I'm doing the recording again. But if you email me, I can get back to you next week. So there is that option as well. And it's very easy, tsmith@aor.org.uk. Okay, so I think we've come to the end, only 5 minutes over, so that's quite good. It was lovely to have you all here. Please watch out for our next Foundations of Reflexology seminar. That will be in about 2 months' time. And it's probably going to be about basics of reflexology, which will include some of the information we've been talking about today, but also things like Herring's Law and stuff like that. So it should be very interesting. And then we've got further ones moving down through the year as well. We haven't quite crystallized what they're going to be yet. Yes, that's it. That's it today. So I'm going to say goodbye to you all. Clap, 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 clap. And it was lovely to see you all. And yeah, I hope you enjoyed it. Okay then.
Very much. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.